นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังกุณุตรังอุปัชฌายังนัมมาสามิ Someone once commenting on the difference between fiction and non-fiction, and they said that non-fiction deals with the time-bound world of events and phenomena, whereas fiction deals with timeless truths of the human condition. So the news is very soon out of date, but the truths of fiction are never out of date. So as before I became a monk, as being a lot fonder of fiction than non-fiction, I really like that definition. But there is one area in which I think that fiction tends to be not true to the human condition. One of the great challenges for any writer, playwright, script writer, is to create an interesting, good person. In fiction and movies and plays, most good people are kind of boring. And we have an idiom, English, don't we, that the devil has all the best tunes. And usually it's the villains, who are so intriguing and fascinating, and you can't take your eyes off them. So, this is kind of idea that we get from fiction, that kind of evil is more interesting than goodness. Goodness is kind of boring. So this is where I take issue, where I disagree with fiction, because I think that in real life, I would say, so you can put this to the test of your own life and experience, but I would say that in fact evil is boring and banal, and it is in fact goodness which is beautiful and refreshing and creative, and it's not boring at all. So sometimes, goodness can even be seen as weakness. You don't be too good, or people will trample all over you. It's like parents always worried about their kids, being too good, so that way someone will take advantage of you if you're too good. But this idea that there's some kind of a connection between goodness and foolishness and naivety, where does that come from? Why do we think that good people are kind of more naive than people who behave badly? Is that really true? And I think that if you actually consider the behavior of people who are selfish and narcissistic and take no thought about hurting others, that in fact they have very simplistic and naive understanding about the way things are and about human nature and about what really makes us happy and what doesn't make us happy. So I think that goodness doesn't get the praise that it deserves. And so in Buddhism, as I say, we're really trying to look more closely at our experience. This is the insight that you don't have to read a lot of books, you don't have to have a super brain, but you do have to be willing just to look both at the things that maybe are comfortable and easy to look at, but also the things that are not so easy to look at. But if you take that on as a worthwhile thing to do, then you realize straight away it's really difficult. And one of the reasons it's really difficult is that our mind is very weak and lacks the energy and the integrity to pursue that kind of work, that kind of inner work. And this is why the meditation practices are so important, to sharpen the mind, to clarify the mind, to stabilize the mind, to energize the mind. The fact that there may be some reduction of stress and relaxation, that's a wonderful thing, but those are more byproducts of meditation. They're not the goal of meditation. The goal of meditation is to enable us to see more clearly, to see the way things are. Because we are very adept at lying to ourselves. We have blind spots. We have filters and prejudices that we are hardly aware of, and it's really difficult to cut through those things. But it is really worthwhile. So from my observation, and I think the thing that the most depressing thing in the world, and this is why I came with the same old, that's kind of same old. Well, what is it? What's the root of that? And for me, at least, it's this whole obsession with me. There can be nothing so miserable as a life spent just revolving around me and mine and what I want and what I need and what I don't have and how I should be treated and why am I not treated the way I should be treated. And just when all your thoughts and your desires and your aspirations just revolve around this sense of me, then it's just a very narrow, a miserable life. So an analogy would be you live in this huge, beautiful house, with many floors and many rooms, and you just live in a little cupboard under the stairs, and you never go anywhere else, and you wonder why you feel unfulfilled. So when I was a teenager, if I may be permitted some personal anecdote, my fascination, my interest was wisdom. How do you become wise? What is wisdom? That word fascinated me. So I had my initial idea was that wisdom comes from experience. So after I finished high school, I worked in a warehouse and on a building site, saved some money. I hadn't taken any money from my parents since I was about 13. It was a sort of point of pride. I'd be self-reliant. And I traveled overland I was 17 years old, and I traveled overland from England to India. And I had so many experiences, and some of them very dangerous experiences, and some of them very pleasant. But I lapped it up. I loved it. The more extreme it was, the better, because I had this idea that, just by exposing yourself to all these wonderful different kinds of things, that somehow this thing called wisdom would grow inside me. And then I'd meet these like middle-aged hippies. So I was the youngest one usually. And these are people who'd been everywhere, not just like India and Afghanistan. They'd been to Southeast Asia, and they'd been to Morocco and through Africa and to Bolivia and Peru and all these different places and all these different experiences, and they could tell stories through the night. And yet, I didn't find them very wise. In fact, what it seemed to me is that after a while, they developed a certain way of looking at the world, and then, however much more experience they gained, it just deepened the ruts of their perceptions and their ideas and their accepted view of the world. And I realized that it's the training of the mind that was important. Otherwise, you can have all the most marvelous experiences, and really all you're doing is accumulating memories. And after I returned from India, I went to work in Switzerland on a farm, and I had a book with me, one book, which was an anthology of teachings from the Buddha. And I remember vividly, this is one of my memories, that one evening after a long day picking fruit, I sat down with my book and I read this discourse of the Buddha called The All. And Buddha says, "O monks, what is the All?" And he said, forms cognizable by the eye, ears cognizable by the sounds cognizable by the ears, tastes cognizable by the tongue, odors cognizable by the nose, physical sensations cognizable by the body, and ideas cognizable by the mind. And I realized that, I felt, wow, I'm that time 19 years old. I've traveled to 20 different countries. I've done all these incredible things, but really, all I've ever seen are forms. All I've ever heard are sounds. All I've ever smelled are odors. All the different foods, all the different cuisines from around the world, they're just flavors. And I realized it's just actually very narrow. It's just going round and round. There's just these few things of forms and sounds and odors and tastes and same old. I thought I could spend the rest of my life making some money, going on some exotic trip and having incredible experiences, and in the end, all I would have to show for it was a memory of forms and a memory of sounds and a memory of odors and a memory of flavors, and so what? Yeah, this was like an insight. So what? And so this is when I really started to take the the training of the mind seriously, because it's the wisdom comes from not from accumulating particular experiences, but understanding the nature of all experience. So in meditation as well, if you're meditating in order to gain a certain kind of special experience, then you've missed the point. And because the meditation is giving you the skills to understand the nature of all experience. So if you're meditating in order to get some particular thing, some particular experience, some particular insight, then we can call that, using the traditional language of the discourses, that means you're practicing in order to go to heaven. So that's what heaven is, isn't it, really? It's a permanently pleasant mental state. So if you're practicing meditation because you think that you can get rid of things that you don't like about yourself or in yourself, and you can enter into this permanently blissful state, that means you want to go to heaven. But enlightenment goes beyond heaven. So there was a kind of an awkward exchange when Ajahn Chah went to England for the first time, and he was taken around the local church by the vicar, very nice man, and so Ajahn Chah said to him, asking him about spiritual practice and prayer to God, and the vicar said, in your meditation, do you reach God? And Ajahn Chah said, oh, we go further than that, he says. So it was quite a challenge for the translator to translate that without being offensive to this very kind vicar who was taking them round. So it's beyond any one particular thing or one particular category. But going back to this same old kind of feeling, and how that is rooted in the sense of self. Another analogy is like the fly in the soup. You have this big pot, what do you call it? Big pot of soup, delicious soup, and you get one fly in it, and then usually people throw the whole thing out, isn't it? Because of this one fly. And that one fly in our life is that sense of self. When everything becomes seen through that prism of self, and really recognize how that affects and undermines your happiness, and the ways that we think and the ways that we interpret our experience. So in the Western world, then this phenomena of guilt is so deep and widespread, and for Asians for a long time, they find it quite incomprehensible, and Asian teachers certainly. These days, people telling me in Bangkok, a lot of people complain of this feeling. But I would point out, this is a kind of a typical experience. Someone decides to do a good thing, a selfless act of kindness, generosity, and spends a lot of time planning it and putting effort into this activity, and then say a few hours into the activity, whatever it might be, there's a thought comes up into the person's mind as, oh, people are just going to praise me so much for this, or this is going to do my image so much good, or something like that. And then the next thought is, yeah, that's why you're really doing it, isn't it? Come on, be honest, be real. This is really, and this is a very poisonous kind of delusion. So you have all these wholesome mental states, one after another for a long time, and then you have an unwholesome mental state, and you decide that unwholesome mental state is more real than all the wholesome mental states that preceded and succeeded. So why do you give that kind of weight? Why are the unwholesome and the mean kind of thoughts in your mind more real than the good ones? Why do you prioritize those things? Why does that seem to be who you really are? So many people say, oh, if people knew who I really was, nobody would want to have anything to do with me. No, it's not true at all. But that's the kind of self-obsessed thought that comes up. So this idea that not only is this attachment to an idea of self already a fly in the soup, it's already a toxic kind of thought, but what makes it even more toxic, even more tragic, is this idea that the self is basically bad. And it's essentially a bad thing. So we come back to how do we deal with that? So some people say, how do you get rid of the ego? And you don't have to do, why would you do that? How could you do that? There's no idea of ego in the Buddha's teaching, but what there is something called Atuvadupatthana, which means attachment to a concept of self or an idea of self. You don't have to get rid of an ego because there isn't one in the first place. There isn't a self. There's just an assumption of one. There's just it's a very lazy, instinctual understanding of life and who you are, which is based essentially on lack of awareness, lack of observation, lack of investigation of what's actually going on. So if you begin to meditate, what do you observe? Well, if you have even a small amount of peace in your mind, and the mind is with the breath even for a short period, what happens when you are aware and awake? That sense of being male or being female, it's not present. A sense of being this person with this personal history, with this personality, etc., etc. It's completely absent. So you have your mind is clear, bright, sharp, and yet so many of the things that you take for granted and you think is who you really are absent at that time. So that, don't worry about not being so peaceful. I mean, just learning from whatever comes up, that's already a really important thing to recognize. So let's say you're meditating for a while, your mind getting a little bit calm, and then what happens is a thought pops up into the mind. So did you make that thought? Was it you who decided to have that thought? No, it just pops up. Putkunma is in Thailand, we say. Where does it come from? Who knows? Why do you think that? Why would you possibly think such a thing? The kinds of things that come in your mind. Where did that come from? And the thing like you to observe, or at least to see whether you agree with me, is that at that moment that the thought arises in your mind, there is no sense of me, the thinker. That thought comes afterwards. So in everyday life, you have to have an owner before something which is owned, okay? But in experience, unmediated experience, where you're looking very directly at what's going on, something arises and then you take hold of it. And that sense of me and mine is something that you're creating moment by moment. It's not something that's there, it's something that you add on to experience unnecessarily, and that's the cause of so much of our suffering. And we do it because it's a habit, that we've always done it, and we don't have to do it. So you can have experience. It's not that you suddenly don't take it, responsibility for your actions or your feelings anymore, but they are seen as conventional truths. So this is another important feature of Buddhist teaching. We say there are two kinds of truth. There's an unmediated truth, that which we can know in the present moment. And there are conventional truths, or what we call agreed truths. And that's not a bad thing, it's a very good thing. All the human progress that allows us to lead our lives in the way that we do these days is due to our ability to create truths, conventions. So money is a convention. We all, if we all agree that this piece of paper or this, is worth something, then we can exchange it for goods and services. But in itself, it's not the natural state. If a Martian was to see this, or someone, they wouldn't know what it was. It is so because we agree it to be so. So there are truths that are known, can be known as direct experience, and there are truths that are created through mutual agreement. And if we recognize and distinguish between those two kinds of truths, then we can live in that conventional world. So, if an arahant, if a great enlightened being is going to travel overseas, he still applies for a passport. He doesn't say that name, that doesn't encapsulate who I am. But it'd be ridiculous. And he responds to his name and uses all these symbols and agreed conventions because that's what makes the world go round. Because it enables us to communicate and live together in a humane way. But it doesn't, it's not taking those things as being absolute truths, you see. So keep looking at what gives that sense of dreariness in your life. It's not goodness. It's the opposite. When your mind becomes greedy, then it becomes very predictable and very easily manipulated. If you look at all the advertisements around us, what are the elements of human personality that advertisers use to manipulate us? Yes, every now and again there are some kinds of goodness are used as tools, but mostly it's greed and fear, and these more negative mental states, because when we become greedy, we become stupid. When we become angry, we become stupid. When we're deluded, we're stupid. So this is the point, like goodness is intelligent, true goodness in the Buddhist understanding. And in fact, this can be seen from the word for goodness in the Pali language, which is also like imported into the Thai language. It's kusala or kuson in Thai. And so that is the word for good or goodness. But the etymology of the word is intelligent. It's gosala. So gosala becomes kusala. Goson becomes kuson, which means that for it to be true goodness, it has to be intelligent. Goodness is not stupid, And if you're developing this mindfulness and awareness, then you're aware of what's going on in your body, you're aware of what's going on in your mind, real time, in the present moment. If something happens, then you're aware of what the reaction in your body and your mind immediately, and you can respond rather than react. So this is another way of talking about the path of practice. We're going beyond mere reaction to intelligent response. And an intelligent response to experience is called goodness. It's the smartest thing. It's the best way to behave. And if you behave with a mind of kindness and compassion, you don't feel that sort of same old. If you have mindfulness, you're in the present moment, you're not just falling into the trap of memory and prejudice and opinion and view and belief, but you're seeing things with fresh eyes. So that ability to live with a fresh mind, which is not simply comparing things with other things, or doesn't mean that you have a sort of a set idea about life and then try to fit everything into it, but you're being willing to open your mind and look clearly, what's really going on. So when there's you see an advertisement, for instance, and then you're aware of the feeling in your body, and they're trying to use my sensual desire or my sexual desire in order to manipulate me. There's this recognition, and at that moment you're free of that. Whether or not you consume that product, that's another thing. But you're not consuming it as a slave. You're consuming it, out of a choice based on the value of the product, for instance. So this is the whole practice of freedom. So without it, one of the things that you should be able to appreciate when you meditate is just how unfree the mind is. And we can observe this with regard to what we call the worldly Dhammas. Somebody praises you, even for some small thing, or something like, you just feel good immediately. Or somebody criticizes you, and then you feel bad. and your whole mental world is fluctuating, and your mental states of happiness are almost completely determined or conditioned by the world around you and by the people around you. So how can any kind of stable sense of well-being ensue if your mental state is so unstable and so easily swayed? So if you have that kind of mindfulness, you say, yeah, these are words of praise. So, yeah, praise is like this. This is just praise. This is what praise feels like. Oh, this is what criticism feels like. I feel it here. How do you feel? Where do you feel it in your body when you get criticized? Where do you feel it when you're criticized for something that you didn't do? How do you deal with that? And if the more you have this sense of entitlement, how dare they speak to me like that? Then you've lost it, haven't you? You see, what is this? What's going on? This inquiring mind, this interest, this learning mind. We're learning from things that are going on. If you want to, if your path is one of control, and you think that you can find some peace by controlling the people around you, controlling the circumstance, so that you only have to be with things and people you like, and you don't have to be with things and people you don't like, then that's endless frustration and stress. But you can recognize pleasant phenomena as pleasant, unpleasant as unpleasant, but you don't have to be dragged about by them. You can develop this inner stability and clarity and happiness which is independent of circumstances. And this is through looking and seeing and understanding, not by adopting a belief system or trying to develop a very calm, impregnable state of mind, but it's developing the tools to be able to be with what's going on and to see things the way they are, rather than the way that you would like them to be. Okay, I think I've exceeded my time limit by 3 minutes, so I will conclude the talk at this point, and now we can have some discussion and questions and answers, and you can ask me anything you want. You can teach me something if you like. I'm quite interested to learn.